This is the second part of our morning on the theological and public policy intersections about poverty. George Carlin once said, "I'm completely in favor of the separation of church and state. My idea is that these two institutions mess us up enough on their own, so both of them together is certain death." Today we have four panelists who are going to share their thoughts on the intersection of theology and public policy. Just how is public policy shaped when informed by religion? And I will ask each of them to give an opening statement, and then we will open the discussion for questions. Reverend Dennis Dorsch is a retired United Methodist minister and activist. He founded and was directly involved for 14 years in D.C. Homeless Mission, a program that delivers food and blankets to people on the streets of Washington, D.C. And this program is still in place today. And so, Reverend Dorsch, I'm going to start with you actually. So you off. Micah writes in chapter 6, verse 8, "O people, the Lord has told you what is good, and this is what he requires of you, to do what is right, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God." When talking about poverty, what does this verse mean to us today?
The essential point of Christianity is that our entire relationship with God has been shaped throughout the Hebrew Scriptures and our, what we call the New Testament, the words of Jesus and of the early church leaders. They are connected for us. They are not separate and divided. And the intention of what Jesus teaches is precisely to fulfill what Micah talks about the necessity of loving God, of doing that which is just or right in God's sight, and of being responsible for one another. Jesus talks about being responsible for our neighbor. And in case we get confused, Jesus gives us several definitions of who our neighbor is. And our neighbor is ultimately defined as anybody who happens to be on the side of the road needing help. Any person who is in need of help is our neighbor. And we have a responsibility to them to provide that help. It's the responsibility that the prophets and the psalmists talk about. It's the responsibility that Jesus constantly refers to. You've heard reference already this morning to the passage in Matthew 25, where Jesus asks the question, when I was hungry, did you feed me? When I was thirsty, did you give me something to drink? When I was naked, did you clothe me? When I was sick or in prison, did you come to care for me? If you didn't do it for the least of these, my sisters or brothers, you didn't do it for me. And it doesn't really matter from a Christian perspective where you fall in terms of your theology and your political ideology. If you are on the right wing, the far right wing, the fundamentalist wing, whatever you want to call it, then you are probably concerned about the end time and about the day of judgment. And if that's your concern, then you had better do what Jesus said, because he says that that day of judgment is going to ask you that question. And if your actions have not met what he considers to be the proper response of caring for the very least of these of our communities, then he's going to just send you away. He has no use for you. In fact, he in effect says, "Go away, bother me, I don't know who you are." If you happen to be on the far left side of our Christian theology and political ideology, then the same principles apply, because Jesus says, you need to have an absolute concern for every person, that we are all connected one to another. And whatever happens to one of us happens to all of us. And this is my commandment, that you love one another, that you care for one another, that you treat each other as though they were a member of your family. The rabbi can refer better than I to, in the Old Testament, in the Hebrew Scriptures, the psalmist talks about the fact that if you are going to be responsible in your society, you must love the poor and care for the poor. Job talks about the fact that before disaster fell, he would go out and sit outside the gate, and he would be honored and lauded by the people as a just man who did just things, because whenever there was a person who was in need, Job would take care of that person and would provide whatever it was they needed. The prophet Daniel tells King Nebuchadnezzar that if he really wants to repent, and if he really wants his government to continue and prosper, then he had better take care of the poor. Because if he doesn't take care of the poor, then disaster will befall his government. For us, there is no separation of church and state. For us, we have a responsibility as people of faith to so act and so obey the commandments of God that they become the reality of our community, that they become the reality of our state, that they become the reality of love for one another, quite apart from any particular individual religious affiliation or assignment. Never does Jesus ask, do you deserve to be helped? It has nothing to do with who deserves it. It has nothing to do with how you got to that state. The fact of the matter is, you are in need, you're hungry, or you're thirsty, or you're homeless, and you need shelter, clothing, and it's my responsibility as a follower of Jesus to provide that. And if I fail to do that, woe is me.